Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting for me to be here, and not just to see all this excitement about style guides in the audience, but also thanks to Gina for putting this together. So another hand for Gina for putting this on. It's awesome. So let's talk about cohesiveness, right? One of the primary things we think about when we're creating an online style guide or a design system is, are things going to be cohesive? And Google, with material design, really hit a home run, right? You look across all their different experiences, across lots of different devices, and you can see evoked some of the simplest design choices permeating all those different pieces. I continue to be alarmed and ask my clients to figure out how to make the navigation at the top of the page across all their different products work the same way. And my goodness, the logo, the search button, the iconography, where the search box is, they're a search company, I get it. But as you even peel through things that Google produces, and you look across all those different navigation systems, I'm an information architect at heart, and you start to see some of the seams of the design system, right? Or is it really even a problem? So we asked ourselves the question of, are the buttons in the same place for a lot of these different apps, particularly the productivity apps on the far left of Mail, Calendar, and Drive? Yeah. Are the stacks of links spaced the same way? Not always. Is iconography next to each of the different links within this? Are they using the same code? Probably not. Almost assuredly not, from what I heard, at least circa 2013 and 14. But we start to peel apart all these different parts. And we break it down into what Brad talks about in terms of all the atomic elements that we have. And we have a thing like a new button. And a new button has a color and a label and a text transform on the label and a rounded corner that is, I don't know, 3 pixels? 4 pixels? How many times have I gone through my own work and my collaborators' work to ask the question, do we need a variable for border radius? Yeah, we probably do. And so when you even start to break that down, you think about color alone. And when you display those colors in your living style guide, you show them in what I love to refer to as tint stacks. Right? You have all the different tints and shades, and they're ordered, and they show you all the different hex values. On the right-hand side, they imply what type color you're supposed to use on top of it. And they're named in a way that you can inject a new value if you need to. So for example, it's not reds 1 through 8, because when you need red 7.5, you're kind of screwed. And so these basic properties like color, type, and iconography set the tone for everything else in your design. And by simply varying the tone or the choices or the decisions that went into those different pieces, you start to see a design language emerge. And while a design language has lots of other parts to it, certainly the space, which is kind of abstract to define. It's hard to really think about space in a way that you use consistently across all your parts. And I'm really interested to hear Rachel talk a little bit later, I think tomorrow, on motion. It's really those primary 3 things that we use and I look at as a big 3 of type, color, and iconography to think and perceive how well are we doing with our design system. That button. And once we get over that hump, then we start to apply those choices to more complex things. And so I try to include real things going on in my life right now. I'm working on a project, and I was asked to create a card, and the card has an image above a big headline that has a subhead, and then it might have some tags on it. We need a primary action and some other icons. I design it, and I show my teammates, and they all think it looks good. And then somebody else creates a card in their project the same week, and it looks like this. Okay, I thought we already decided what the typeface was. Aren't we using Proxima Nova or Lato or whatever it is? And why are we centering and all capping the title of this card? And why are the icons on the upper right? Because now they're starting to obscure the image. And then this happens, okay? And these are the conversations that we really have to have with our teammates in order for this design system to work. It's not just about creating the parts, but it's about having legitimate conversations, not just about the brand blue, because every single one of my clients uses a digital blue for their interactive things, no matter what the brand color is. And 1 or 2 of you are in the audience right now. And I still don't understand why everybody chooses blue, because link colors were blue in 1996. But you look at these, and you need to provoke the conversations with your teammates to say, do we care about this? Are cards something that we need to put in our design system? Do we need to create and sustain an autonomy as a designer to solve my product's needs? Or can we look at these 3 cards and say, we're solving the same thing over again? That's not the autonomy we're looking for to solve and design a product. And so we asked ourselves, are cards something that are going to be in our design system? What parts are going to be in it? And so Brad talked about an exercise. I do something similar very early in an engagement to have everybody sit down, print out what might be across 5 product teams, 50 to 60 screenshots. We cut them all up. And we go through a protocol, really, where we cut them up out all the components. We group them on the table. And then we label what the groups are. And then we tape those groups to big tabloid sheets of paper that you can walk out with as a systems designer, right? You're the person here that needs to walk out and use this as an artifact later. But then prioritize them with little post-it flags, green, yellow, red, most important to least important. And then you label them, and you get at some of that shared vocabulary that we're hearing about. And there are other things that we do, too, to get people on the same page, or simply to reveal a lack of being on the same page and what parts that we think need to be in our system. I created a worksheet. Feels kind of banal, kind of boring, right? But they fill them out, and you circle, or you cross out the categories you don't think you need, you circle the things that you do think you need, you check the boxes, and suddenly you have this itemized thing you did over 15 minutes, you put it out in front of everybody on a table, and you realize, oh, that person thinks that we're doing an editorial style guide, just like Brad talked about. This person thinks that it's all going to be about the design language. And so all their checks are on the top of the page. And now you have a discussion point to think about where your ideas diverge. Hopefully you get it on the same page. This is a screenshot of early Project Kennedy, which became material design. And you start to explore concepts at the page level. Because you can't build all these atomic parts and understand how they fit together without seeing them all fit together. And so seeing these pictures of an emerging design system is really revealing too, because it's about a before and after effect. If you want to show and prove the value of a cohesive design, oftentimes it's through what we sometimes call reference designing, creating a set of reference concepts that aren't intended to be built, but are simply a quick exercise. You put them on a wall, you put all your old apps on the wall above, you put all your new current reference designs underneath it, and you start to be able to evoke, that's what a blue button looks like. And if you squint your eyes enough, you'll see a blue button across each of those designs. And you don't see a blue button across what are actually quite a few Windows apps, as well as other applications that this team was building. Now this is with a company in England called Redgate that all their stuff's on walls. They don't use Jira. Everything that they have is on a wall in their space because that's where everybody is. And so that was a technique that they used to bring people together, and they left it up there. They did it in March. They launched their design system in August. But that became a symbol and a sort of an evoking conversation point because it was on the walls and you could see where it was going to go. And so once you get the parts, once you create the reference concepts, you start to understand, I've got a lot of stuff to do. I've got a lot of work to do. And yeah, a design system is work. It's fun work. It's energizing work. It feels like you're playing with Lego all day, but it's still work. And so you have, how can you take all the things that you're going to do, whether it's purple post-it notes that correspond to a design language, blue that correspond to all the different components you're going to build, the yellow stuff that talks about how people get started with it and how you document it and how you have an intake process for it and how you engage participants or even contributors for it, because people need to know how to engage with you. And how to, maybe even those green sticky notes that designate things like accessibility or SEO or code performance. And do those things have a home? And you take all those post-it notes and you suddenly do a quick road mapping exercise to understand, here's the stuff that we need to do by the end of this week. And by the end of this week, we're going to do all that stuff with all those dots because we dot voted this stuff to prioritize it. And then sooner, maybe in the next couple of months, we're going to do this stuff. And then later here, we're going to do that stuff. And it's amazing how full this week is. And you think to yourself, oh, we're going to get all that done. And honestly, that's like 2 months worth of work. And so how can you tell via your roadmap a legitimate story of how you're going to progress through all those places? And so you get to a point, you're having a design system week, you're putting all that stuff in the lobby of your organization, people are putting on post-it notes to comment on things, but you're revealing the potential of the future for them. And that generates excitement in a transparent way that's going to hopefully engage who you're working with. And you get to that point when mission accomplished, you launch that sucker. I launched my style guide. Maybe even you got to do it publicly. And everybody else in this room favorites your thing, and there's all this awesome energy around it because it's so cool. We love our artifact, right? Like Brad was talking about. And it is amazing, and you feel so good about it. You've accomplished your goal until the hearts stop and the discussion stops. And so this is an indicator to me that there is often a mindset that's focused on the wrong thing. It's not to create all the parts that people use. Instead, you've got a mission, and there's a bunch of words on this slide, but you've got a mission, and the mission has a specific criteria that you can measure success. I love the word clouds that have been on all these slides already today. The four or five things that I often say is, it has to improve the quality of the user experience. It has to make it more cohesive across the journey that spans products. It has to make us more efficient. And it has to make us more collaborative. Okay? But the thing you got to actually do is ship products that use it. Right? It's not about creating a style guide. It's seeing that seep into and have a positive outcome on the actual products that your customers use. And so it's not just about the parts. It's about the people, the connections that you draw across all of them. And it's about the products. It's about the experiences that you're going to build. That is going to be the mission. And so the story I want to tell for the rest of this talk are stories and lessons learned that I've had around people and products. And so I think about, what products is this thing going to reach? And so design systems have a different reach. They're not all Foundation or Bootstrap or Pattern Lab. Those things reach the world, right? And in fact, the people that build those are creating systems for people that create systems for people that create products. Those things are massive, and the way that they need to be architected needs to have a lot of deliberate care that focuses on those. A lot of the folks in this room are going to be in one of the next two. Either you're an enterprise, and the whole enterprise has finally gotten behind the establishment of a single language and a single system by which they're going to centralize and then federate out all of their work for a design system. Or maybe it's just a smaller portfolio. The folks I've talked to at Intuit that have Harmony as a design system, and you can go to their site, also express that actually that's one design system living within this system of multiple design systems. And so it's interesting to have conversations around not necessarily how they collide, but how they complement or how they relate to one another. And so your design system that you're working on may not be for the enterprise, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable. And in fact, even if you're a team, a product team that has one designer and two developers and one product manager, you can still have a playbook and take this mindset of a system, and it has value. So while I hear things like, well, we had this style guide and it failed, we had this other thing and it failed, it just didn't live up to the aspirations that may be not focused in the right way to think that everybody has to be like material design, or every living style guide has to be as deep and well-tested and maintained over time as a Bootstrap. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value, that these practices that are modular to build all these components don't have value. So I sat in a room when I started a client engagement. It was about 2 years ago. And I was in the corner, and it was this conference room that had 25 or so digital leaders from Dallas and San Francisco and Washington, D.C. and Richmond and all these other places. And they all convened to talk about where they're going with all their products across all their lines of business. And I was this small little consultant, happened to coincide with my first aid. So the guy brought me along and said, sit in the corner, and we'll just deal with the component library for our product after this. So this will be good context for you. And so then the CEO, or the VP of Digital, says, hey, Nathan, can you come into the next room with me? And he says, draw out what your scope is for this. I said, okay. So I draw on the board. I'm like, okay, we're going to create this hub for all your accounts, and you got these other systems you've inherited, and we're going to integrate them into one sort of portal that's integrated, and my job is to help your team create a component library to build this thing over the next, well, it's going to be 12 to 18 months, because it's a lot of complex transactional stuff. He goes, that's really interesting. Because in the room next door, I've got all these different designers talking about all their other products and all of our other web-based account tools. And we actually just launched an iPhone app. We're about to launch the iPad one, and we're working on the Android one too. And yet, we're also building this account setup tool that when you come to our site, which is a web marketing site, You then sign up and you become a customer, and then you're going to land on this hub. He goes, hey, Nathan, I want you to help us build a design system that covers all this stuff. I was like, dude, we need to renegotiate that contract. And then he goes, do you think you can do it? And I might have made a mistake, because I said, okay. But it changed the nature of how I needed to collaborate and think about what was in front of me. Because instead of an account hub that's really small, narrow, and predictable, it was this whole suite of all these different products. And so I went through a couple things in my head. And the first one was, by the very nature of how he took the pen out of my hand and drew that diagram, he identified the flagships that he cared about. He set the tone as the VP of Digital of, here are the 3 main things that you need to connect. And I thought it made total sense, because it spanned the journey in a web-based way from selling to a customer, to acquiring a customer, to sustaining the relationship with the customer. And honestly, a customer could traverse this in about 10 screens, built by 3 teams that weren't collaborating at that point really much at all. And so he chose the flagships, but he also knew that those flagships were working on projects actively, okay? And so there were a ton of other circles on that diagram, but he, and with me, narrowed the focus to choose only the ones that mattered most. And there were some other flagships that really were important to the organization. One of them on the far left was their iPhone app, but it was launched, and those resources had moved on to work on other stuff. And that iPhone app actually set the tone for a lot of things, for example, the iconography. And there were other flagships that could have participated too. But there were also all sorts of other destroyers and cruisers, if you're into like battleships and stuff. And so I knew that they were out there. And so I knew that I had to be sensitive to those too and be decreasingly engaged with them to understand where the organization would need to go. And yeah, I needed to be mindful for the submarines that I couldn't see. Okay? And so I knew I would have blind spots, but it turns out that because the VP of Digital defined what the priority was and was able to go back into the other room, honestly, and then within the next day had begun to seep into everybody else's understanding that, I don't want to say the haves and have-nots, but the people or the products that we were going to focus on, it worked well. And each of those 3 products were on a timeline where they were doing work incrementally, and they were going to launch and have a major launch at different times. And so it became clear to me, they're not all going to launch at the same time, and 2 out of these 3 things aren't going to launch within the next year. And so I made up a date. And I said, okay, within 3 months, all of these teams need to be functioning together and revealing the same, at least big 3 of their design language, which actually was a pretty darn tough task to get them all to orient and line up like that. And after which, they would be synced enough to launch to be working together. These stories don't necessarily work with every design system that we work on. And my company happens to find themselves working with companies like Cisco and Alcatel-Lucent and NetApp, a bunch of companies that sell like big hardware, expensive boxes. And they all have a pattern by which we solve web property design systems. So if you find yourself working on web marketing sites, this should be a fairly familiar kind of architecture to you, right? It's a portfolio, oftentimes you call them properties, and each one of those circles, they might not have a product team devoted to it, but they usually have a stakeholder that owns the direction that section of the site is going in. And that stakeholder might engage some internal or vendor team to actually build those parts of it. And so products and support, less so training and about us, solutions and services. And so the first thing that I learned is, these things tend to emerge from the product section because the product section is selling, and those people selling are most closely affiliated with marketing and brand that own the brand standards. And so that's where we found ourselves most of the time. But it turns out, if you're thinking about flagships, this diagram should make it darn clear who the other flagship is. And so I ask you, who's your get for your design system as you're thinking across all these different products? It turns out it's support. Okay, the product section is a bunch of predictable marketing carousels, right? Oh God, can we just eradicate those things from the earth? But all sorts of components like carousels that you flow content into and you have a basic set of layouts. But support is hard. Support is a bunch of different transactional apps that all have distinct flows and probably distinct designers working on them. But if you are if you're trying to span a design system across a set of web properties, do you think it works if you don't get support? And the answer is no. You also have to avoid distractions. And so as you look at this, you might ask yourself, all right, which things are you going to color next? Because one of these things is a huge distraction. Does anybody have a guess? What's the distraction for a design system? Anyone? Training? No. The homepage is a freaking distraction. Okay? Massive numbers of stakeholders who you can't debate with. Okay? Working on components that aren't going to work anywhere else in the site, that they're going to change all the time. And so while the design language hopefully is going to be flowed through in a very smooth way that's cohesive with the rest of the experience, the rest of the componentry, have at it, people. Build one-offs. And oh my gosh, is that heretical for me to say in this room? Build one-offs. It's okay for products to do that. And so there's I really liked Brad's slide where he injected the design system between design and development and the actual products themselves. But that puts it in a very dangerous place as arbiter of all the things that you ever build. And so it's really disarming to tell people, not everything needs to go in the system. In fact, all those different circles might have a bunch of smaller stuff that never bubble up into the system. But if they're using the tooling that the system provides, maybe a set of tokens and design language properties that the system provides, and some of the components, that is a huge win. So be careful not to put yourself in terms of being the arbiter of what gets out there. And the third thing is, find the hook that gets them to use your system. And when it comes to web properties, it's very clear what the hook is. Because usually the central team is going to be associated with or actually doing the navigation that creates the shell around all those different pages. And so when you change the global navigation, Canon is, and some of the other examples notwithstanding, it often gets propagated throughout the experience. And so what that does is not just propagate a component, but it propagates a link to a style sheet or something else that everybody else starts to ingest. Are you telling the support team, hey, once you put the header on, everything else has to look exactly right, or else you're not allowed to use it, and everybody else fails, and everybody's going to get fired? No. You want to get at least the shell of the page to work well together, and once you get the shell, you've got the end to start the conversation about everything else. There's a third type of client that we find ourselves working with at my company, and it's a client that has a balance of web properties, sort of static marketing content. You can see the stuff at the top. Feels a lot like that at Marriott. The home page, all the hotel properties and the templates for those, a bunch of other content sections. And then in the middle, you have a core path that the customer might take to find a hotel room, book the hotel room, and then manage their account over time, those web apps. And then the corresponding experiences that honestly are pretty similar to that middle row that might find themselves onto an iPhone or an iPad or an Android device via different apps. And what I've found is, to win, or to succeed, is probably a better term. To succeed with a design system, you have to radiate influence out from where the core metrics are actually happening. With Marriott, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to suspect that they measure how many rooms they book. And they have a certain number of booked rooms every single day that if you inject a new design language, or you go responsive, or you make some change, and it makes the needle go down, that change is not going to fly. But the other reason so they have a tremendous amount of influence. But the other reason is because they actually share some common interest with both the top row and the bottom row. The top row is other web-based properties that are integrated or should feel integrated as a part of that journey. And the bottom row has a bunch of transactions and flows that the customer does that should still feel the same as the way they do them on the web. So interestingly, there's a lot less of a relationship between the iPad app and the hotel property pages or the home page, but there's a strong relationship radiating out from the middle. And so one of the things that I encourage teams to do is demo the journey. Right? You saw the before and afters early on via those reference designs in your process. But if you're orienting teams to converge and they're all going to launch some bigger launch together or at a similar time, they still might be doing the work as independent product teams. And at the time, at Marriott, the independent teams were using PSDs for the homepage and for the My Account section. We were doing hi-fi prototypes for search and for the hotel properties. But what happened was, we were all working in these independent streams. And so our senior director of UX at the time, Olivia Labate, had a great idea. She said, let's just stitch those suckers together. We've got some of the stuff already in an HTML prototype, so how can we take predictable artifacts emerging from those other teams without requiring those teams to change their practice, other than just give us your files every 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and create a clickable prototype that essentially links in the whole journey together, all those different paths in strategic ways, including the navigation at the top that I talked about. And so this gave Livia an awesome, powerful, influential tool that she would take in the Stitch prototype. It lived for about 9 months. And she always said, it always had an end. When we launched, this thing is not going to be maintained anymore. This isn't a permanent way we're doing business. But she could go into any VP or any group that's a little bit more distant from the core groups that were working on those products, and she could show that demo, and it took 1 minute. It was a whole agenda for an hour-long meeting. And suddenly she had 59 minutes to talk about whatever other agenda she wanted to talk about, because she could smoothly convey in a convincing way what that cohesive journey looked like. It was her stone soup. If you haven't read that kid's book to your kids, it's essentially a way to influence people, to get them to go along with what you need to have happen. The other challenge is the people challenge. So as you have an enterprise or a portfolio of products that you're trying to get a design system to adopt, you have to think about the people that are involved. About 10 years ago, I started working with Sun Microsystems, and they have what, and still to this day today, I think is the most bitchin' component library I've ever seen. Okay? This thing had so many components. Each component had a little code next to it, so you could search for it concretely within your HTML comments that bounded each of the components when they got injected into all the different pages. It spanned different properties. If you see the legend underneath the tabs, sun.com and developer.sun.com were two different massive places, if you remember Sun back in the day. And they were just, the scale of this thing was massive. And it was built by essentially one guy. He was a rock star front-end developer that was very good at design too. He did have a few minions that went in and out from time to time, so it was kind of a small team. But this could never fly anymore, because not only as Sun doesn't exist, rest in peace, it was a great company, but it doesn't fit with the way that we do design, and the way that we think about collaboration, and the way we think about propagating those decisions across all those other teams. His was a solitary one, and it was one where he said, hey, I've got this living style guide, I'm going to take it and put it there, and everybody can use it. In Sun's case, it was actually, everybody has to use it, because nobody else there was really literate enough to build it themselves and justify the massively higher expense for them to do it, rather than use Andrew's stuff and essentially build whatever they needed to on the edges of that. I see some teams doing that, particularly teams that emerge out of web marketing, that say, I hear it, you guys want a tiny bootstrap for ours. I can give you that. And they place it out in the middle, and nobody else uses it. Because it's as if in one of those other diagrams, they're at the top of the diagram thinking about their concerns, and it's built for them. But it's not built for everybody else. And so how do you start to change? And one of the ways is to think about how to centralize some of that activity. This is the common push and pull of organizational change, where sometimes you have a moment where things will go more central. You get the UX all together, and then other times they burst like shrapnel out into all the product teams, and they're suddenly disconnected from each other. And so one of the ways you can think about it is that, are you ready to invest in a central function to build this design system for the long term? And what does this do? It enables you to spread it more broadly. You can gain visibility. You can pay attention to opportunities. You start to run this thing as a program, but those people centrally located may lack the context and visibility into every different thing that's going on. And so those are things that you have to watch for. Leah Bewley gave a talk, I believe it was last year, that talked about the modern UX organization, and she talked about this gradual scale that modern organizations and the way that they structure themselves are. And one of the things she noted was, absolutely, you don't see design systems in the immature, not modern organizations. You see them in the modern organizations. And if you're looking for really good advice to inspire you to think about transforming your organization into something that would be an organization willing to consume a design system, listen to her talk. Also, change the perception of what people think that you do. Gina herself, I think this was late last year, had her title changed. And that, I think, is really validating. Number one, it expresses her inner geekdom to be called Senior Designer Design Systems. But it also helps make a statement that this is what I do, and this is how I serve everybody else in the organization. And notice this sense of serving that needs to come into how you think about what your own self-image is. That parts worksheet is also helpful as a litmus test to see what kind of skill sets you need on your design system. You're going to do an editorial section. You're going to have voice and tone. You're going to have a big punctuation list and a big word list. And you're going to know how you use dollar signs and how many decimal places and how yen works and all that kind of stuff. Well, then you need someone with that skill set, and you need someone with that focus on that particular part. Or you need to create the expectation that that is outside the boundaries of what we're trying to do here. Contrasting this centralized feel is a federated mindset. As you have all these different product teams that are doing their work, and the shrapnel UX and visual design staff that are now in all of those, that's almost always where a lot of your top talent of design is. And so how are you going to get those folks to participate, particularly if you have a central team, but even if you don't? How are you going to bring those folks together to work on the design system collectively? And Salesforce talks about this too, where it's really a balance between the two as you continue to modernize, where you have you have the federated participants, but also the central folks that will pair with those federated groups, maybe for periods of time. And so when you're working with federated designers, suddenly you've got this web of all these different designers working across all these different products. And you see these teams really expanding their design resources to the point where you hear teams of 20, of 80, of 150, of 300 designers. And suddenly your role as a designer is to watch for somebody trying to drive decision on how to do something. And you need to be aware of who else is going to play a key role in influencing that decision. And other people are going to want to watch how that decision's made. Talking about, are we going to use Streamline for our iconography? Are we going to change our digital red to be a little bit more saturated than the brand red that's in the print style guide? There are people that care about that, and there are people that are going to be making those decisions, and there are going to be people that are ignoring those decisions too. And you are stuck in the middle as a design systems engineer, someone like Gina, where I would suspect, and I find myself in this role too, where you're playing the role of connector. But also notice, you're not necessarily always playing the role of decider or designer. Okay? You're more guiding everyone else to make that decision. And you can note where some of the discontinuities lie, and the relationships lie, and how these people talk to each other. And suddenly you need to create instruments like CAP's sliding scale of giving a whatever, that from 0 to 10 says, all right, I'm feeling not really that strong about this. I'm like 2 out of 10. How are you? I'm a 6 out of 10. Okay, we're going to go with the way you do it. That's a really basic way to make decisions, right? But you have to create a framework or be sensitive to the emotions that people have around what can often be subjective decision making when you're trying to convene and create a design system together. Another thing is that as you think about all the people across that landscape, there are going to be people that have strengths. Out of those 300, some of them are going to be really strong with iconography. Others are going to be really strong with color. Some may be really good at information architecture. And so what one team did is they designated on their leadership team, or really on their design system federated team, a set of people that were, I would call them the go-tos. You had a person that everyone looked to for user experience, and that included information architecture. And everybody knew it because he was super at information architecture. You had another person that was really strong in interaction design, had really good qualities around motion, for example, and worked on a lot of the native apps. And then you had a third person that was sort of the go-to when you're talking about the big three of the design language, color, iconography, and type. Okay? But the point was, none of them were the deciders of anything. Instead, they were the person that was always aware of everything and was really strong in that they could guide the discussion to conclusion, and certainly influence it too. But just because letter I and letter U wasn't designated the visual go-to, they still absolutely had a voice, as did everybody else, on color and iconography. And you can start to build those, because UVI is a really stupid acronym. And they use that acronym, and I was like, this is so ridiculous. I can't sit in these meetings with the UVI triumvirate, right? That's so stupid. So while I'm a firm believer and advocate for the role of content strategy and the tone that our copy takes in our interfaces and the voice that it has, I also just wanted to rid the world of that UVI acronym, and we injected a third or a fourth person that had been recently hired as a director of content strategy for a much more apropos civics acronym for the team. And so I don't know if they still use that but as an acronym, but I do hope, and I would guess that they still have this sense of this collegial relationship where everybody has an influence on everything, but still a focus on certain skill sets that they go to. Another thing that I found in organizations like that is mixed doers with delegators. Where delegators, I used to say directors or directors and above, but it's really the doers are the people that are in the design tools all the time solving problems, dealing with the constraints, hitting their head upon the wall until they just give themselves a headache because they just got to pound through a problem. And then you have the delegators, those people that are often directors. They might be directing 5 to 10 to 15 different designers, and they have access to their time. And they have authority over what they work on, and authority over and a lot of influence, honestly, on the creative direction that the organization takes itself. And so mix those folks, because a design system thrives with the participation and contribution of both those kinds of people. You can't have just the delegators in the room, and you can't just have the doers in the room. Oftentimes mixing them together is where you end up. And yeah, as a design system, we talk a lot about the soft, squishy stuff of organizational alignment, and we look at, or we think about in our abstract heads, how all these different people are organized. And undoubtedly, you're going to have people across the organization that will contribute to making this design system. But just as much, you're going to have all those, like the previous speakers have talked about, the folks that you're going to need to align with. And oftentimes, those alignment conversations come at the senior director or VP level, where you're really trying to get oriented such that all those folks are comfortable with where the design system's going, that you understand the roadmaps that they're taking and how they're laying out priorities for their groups, however you're organized. And then there's that person at the very top. And so one of the things EIGHTSHAPES does, my company, after every project, we have 3 things we do. We archive the project, we do a retrospective, and in between we do this survey. And one of the survey questions at the very beginning asked what was particularly satisfying or rewarding about the project, and then what was really dissatisfying about it. And it's sort of this open free text that we get some of our best nuggets that are qualitative. And one time we did a design system, and my senior director of UX, Chris, had been working with this client, and he is the ultimate diplomat. That guy can get along with anybody, and he very confidently and assuredly interacts with people that are at the VP level and above in organizations. And this is what he put on his survey. And I care about Chris because I want Chris to be really satisfied in the work that he does. I want him to be a believer in design systems. I want him to enjoy his day-to-day work. And he said, that alignment work sucked. I don't want to do that ever. Like, I'm sort of getting a little dramatic here, but he was very clearly saying that I didn't like working with the support folks. They didn't seem like they were on board, and they gave us a lot of lip service. And I just didn't enjoy that whole track of work. It was really hard to define. How do we get all these people to work together, as opposed to how do we decide what the corner radius of the button is? That I can do that. I can deliver upon that. But the alignment is too squishy, and it oftentimes is met with a really unsatisfying outcome. And so it opens us up to this notion that as design systems advocates, we're going to have some new identities that we need to grapple with. Not only are we makers and writers and collaborators and reviewers, those are all things that we do in our work. But as a designer or a developer, we might find ourselves as an implicit product manager of the design system itself, thinking about its roadmap and prioritizing its backlog and making sure that we're making good progress and have good velocity towards the releases of whatever the design system is. But then you get increasingly squishy in those other places. You have to sell the thing. You have to evangelize the thing. You have to connect people. You have to align people. And suddenly, all those things you're doing on the right take up almost all your time. And all the stuff on the left, hopefully there still are makers, and there are writers, and there are people doing that stuff. But you might find yourself drifting away from that. And it's that distance that you have to be comfortable with, or you have to acknowledge and say, I don't want that stuff on the right. And that's okay. But if nobody in your organization is going to do the stuff on the right, you don't really have a prayer making the design system work. The last thing, and we've talked quite a bit about this, is get endorsed. This is from a design and tech report that came out recently, and one of the things it said was the 2 ways to improve the design of a company's products is have a CEO endorse it or have an executive team that makes it a priority. Okay, and so this speaks to, while all this soft people stuff is mostly grassroots, bottom-up, individual relationships, there still needs to be the potential for executive endorsement to align everybody around priorities that matter. I had a real privilege. John Wiley took some time to talk with me. He's one of the guys that was one of the formative members of the team that ultimately created material design. I think he actually coined the term material design. And when we talked, it was like for half an hour, and he began the conversation, it was like, I gotta get this out of the way first. First things first, you gotta have support from the top. The fact that we had a CEO that had a vision, that rallied the entire company, made this thing happen. And so do you have that person in your organization such that when things get a little bit tougher, you're talking about cards and how ridiculously inconsistent they are, or you're talking about anything that has collisions in conversations, do you have someone in your back pocket that you can say, well, we can just go talk to that person about whether or not this is important? And if you do, then oftentimes that will diffuse those conversations. So I guess my thunder got stolen a little bit. I'm really proud that it was in another slide. But changing the mindset of thinking of this style guide as an artifact, as a thing that we build, to instead, it is a product. And this product has 2 big things that we need to do. We need to manage this product over time, meaning we got work to do. We've got a roadmap to follow. We've got a backlog to fill. We've got a velocity to keep. And we've got to market our product. We've got to sell it to people. We have to understand what their needs are. And I loved that previous talk that we just saw. Understanding the needs of the organization. And so as you think about your design system as a product, it puts it in a frame of mind to help you organize the things that you need to do and the things that you need to think about. So I do this stuff for a living. I try to get all my projects that are system related. I coach certain clients in a lightweight way. I do workshops and I do system projects. But ultimately, I just delight in design systems and the organization that it brings to and the rigor that it brings to the practice that we have as designers and developers in our work. So thanks for listening. I hope so.
Yeah, okay. You're natural. Very good. In the beginning, it started off with lots of photos of physical stuff, the physical space. You had a particular client, or perhaps multiple of them, they were cutting things out and using tape and sticky notes and things on the wall because that team was together and that worked well. Is there any sense, like, I bet there's teams out there that do that and teams out there that absolutely never, ever, ever do. I'm probably closer to the second one where I feel like I don't reach for the pencil all that often. Do you find there's some success in that like detaching from digital, or have you observed that the teams that do that are more successful in some way?
I don't know that I would align it with being successful, but what I would align it with is it creates an atmosphere around tangible things that people can see and use their hands to work with, but also a venue in which they're all experiencing it together. I could do that kind of inventory of the interface myself and present it to them, but it might take 5 hours of doing all the screenshots, organizing the stuff, and then they just have to sit there and watch it. So getting them engaged to do it themselves makes them own it more. The other thing is my company is a remote company by practice. We've been around for 10 years and we don't have an office. And so while we don't always convene people to sketch or convene people to cut things out, we do try to use our cameras and IPVOs and whatever to still make things tangible when they need to be, because it disarms people from feeling like everything needs to be perfect, but instead makes them feel like they can just work on it and discuss it without a lot of threat.
Yeah, all right, all right. One of the, I think it was the Sun example. There was like, you know, the bitchinest style guide you ever saw or whatever, and that there was some success in that guide, right? And it was created by a lone rogue kind of thing, and that was, you know, maybe a rare example of that being successful with the lone rogue, but or maybe it wasn't, or you know, maybe I forget exactly how that went down. But I bet there's some people in this audience that are like, God, I love this. I love style guides. I'm so jazzed about it right now. I'm going back to work and I'm just going to do it. But there's possibly some danger in that, is that that's, you know, and it's been echoed in a few talks as well, is that maybe the lone rogue isn't the best way to do this, and that you might not see success if you're just like the one person who thinks this is a good idea.
Well, I think that with design systems, it is a platform for people to share that decision making. And so I haven't seen any teams in the last 5 years be successful to think, yeah, that person owns the color purple and they own all the choices around the design language, because what I call that person is a big-ass bottleneck, okay? There's no way that they can make those decisions and be informed enough with those decisions in the vacuum of their single product. And so the design system itself is a platform for them to talk about and make those decisions in the collective. And I think that's why it's more successful more recently, because teams are getting better and better at collaborating and creating that structure, but it also speaks to the fact that the Lone Ranger is not going to really work anymore.
Okay. Here's a new one, a little curveball. Have you ever seen one of those websites? They go around once in a while that are like snarky in nature, and they have like a hero graphic, and they're like, this is every website ever, and it has 3 modules and whatever. And they're both funny, kind of, and slightly rude, and I don't know. I feel like they're interesting in that they have a point, and that there's a sameness to the web design kind of thing. I wonder if there's so many style guides, right? We've talked about some of the big ones, and all these companies have little ones, and it feels like there's so much work, sometimes months and months of effort put behind these things, and then the end result is that it just isn't all that different from the next person's style guide.
Well, I think there's 2 parts to that. There's the system, and then there's the actual expression that the system evokes. And so the systems, I am increasingly hopeful that we will continue to mature and use things like tokened variables that have a taxonomy or schema that actually more and more teams just start to converge on. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have a set of reds that we need to use metaphorically in our own work. And there's not a lot of value in reinventing how to organize the reds. But there is a lot of value in having a particular set of reds that are harmoniously combined with other aspects in your logo mark that make you distinctive about it. And so the example you share of, I actually used it in a workshop to design a living style guide, so it's totally ironic. But yeah, it has a hero, it has a positioning statement in the hero, and then it has 3 big benefits and modules underneath it. And so why is that evocative? Well, yeah, there's a lot of same web design of small businesses that look like that. But the nice thing about that is, at least we've gotten down to the core elements that we need to tell a story. And so there is actually some value in that. And I ask people to say, what is the story of your style guide? How do you position it in your organization? Are you going to include the words HTML and CSS in the title of it? Or is it not even about that? Some teams are still doing design group-only style guides in Sketch and Zeppelin files. So what is your statement, and what are the benefits that are unique about yours? And I think that among that word cloud, there are going to be unique style guides that will continue to exist.
Yeah, that feels pragmatic. But you also made a point that I think some people think of, hey, I don't have time for this, I'm going to reach for Bootstrap or Foundation or whatever, but you made a good point about those, and that they're maybe not a style guide, but a style guide or whatever. It's like one level of, it's a tool for tool makers.
Yeah, I think the tiny Bootstrap is such a great reference, because people who don't do what we do, they know what that is, and they can universally see that thing. And so it helps create essentially it's almost like a statement of work if you're thinking like I do in terms of a design consultant. Do you want this kind of thing? But at the same time, I agree with you that it won't work if it's not manifesting the shared decisions that everybody's going to have. So the reason that my example doesn't work isn't because it's a poorly organized style guide or it looks like Bootstrap. It's that it didn't really think about the constraints and the context of use where it's going to be used.
Right. Another one of your kind of pragmatic or reasonable points was that the homepage is a distraction. That's a pretty solid moment in that talk. Like what's he going to color next? And then it can be a distraction because it may not share as many styles as other pages or whatever. Why bother with it? Maybe it could even live outside of the design system. I wonder if you've felt any pushback on that, or if that, I think of, it made me think of like kind of a line in the sand kind of moment, where I come from, I do a lot of CSS work. Sometimes it's kind of like, I know there's all these rules that we talk about in CSS, like don't use important or something, which is like this trump card for style that you can play. And once in a while people are like, it's cool. once in a while you got to break the rules. But then if you have this firm, like, do not break the rules, it ends up, because one important statement leads to another, and it becomes this, like, sucky thing that becomes bigger problem later on. If you're saying, one page here and there that can be different is okay, can that become, like, cancerous, or are you not worried about it?
I don't think so. I've had more success in working with those federated designers to create an expectation that there are things that we need to share. And so, for example, we'll do an icon audit often, and we'll create this base set of icons, and then we'll start to compare it to other products. When we compare it to another product, there's 4 outcomes it can have. Either the system already has a magnifying glass, use that one. And almost everyone's like, I'm cool with that. And then there are a number of new icons. The system can benefit from the other icons that you have in your product. Can we ingest those? Okay, I can do that. There's a third set of, I'm not really sure why you're using an icon or what this icon's for. Let's talk about it. And then the fourth is either a very small set or at times might be 100 additional icons. No one else in our organization is going to benefit from any of those icons whatsoever. Use them as you wish. Just make sure the tone's consistent. But you create them. You're going to pay for that, and we're not going to take it in the system. And that fourth set creates, that's the autonomy. That creates the understanding that you're not going to be this dictator from above that governs every single decision they make, but instead you're a platform for what everybody's going to share together. And so I think that applies in a lot of cases. And I think that you were talking about the homepage as an example of that. There's little to reuse in the homepage, so why spend the time normalizing?
Okay, so maybe it's okay. Forget about the homepage.
I'm not saying don't design a good homepage.
No, certainly do. But that led into your next point about that maybe starting in the middle and letting it grow from there is kind of a cool thing, especially because the middle is probably where sales happen, and they're kind of, it's more
It's
trackable.
where it's the most trackable things happen in the web apps.
Yeah, it's probably more patternable or whatever. Yeah. Okay, I got one more.
What is he going to do?
What's it going to be good? Well, it was just the concept I was attracted to. Of the people here who are, again, excited about this, and I'm sure there are many that are interested in kind of launching their own for their company or whatever. Maybe you're literally the designer on your team, and what you're thinking in your head is how excited you are to design a card because you're like, God, this is going to be good. I can think of 3 places in our app where it's a little different from each other, and I just can't wait to rein it in. And you're interested in maybe doing the design work, or you're a front-end developer, and you're interested in like crafting really nice HTML for that. But that's just your role in that is whatever your role is, plus seller, plus evangelist, plus connector, plus aligner, plus are you ready for that? I just think maybe, wasn't your point, you should be?
Some may want that. I think my main point is not everybody wants that. And the challenge I have, because I'm a system evangelist and I find myself in that role with clients, is often I also find myself in the role as designer. And it's the perception that the person I'm collaborating with has, or their frame, that makes or breaks the conversation. Because if I start that conversation about cards and then being inconsistent, and they see me as Nathan the designer, suddenly they see me as an opponent that's going to object to the design decisions they have. So I try to disarm them and change the frame that they have to say, this is Nathan the systems designer. I don't care where the icons go. Okay, I don't care if it's all caps on the header. I think that's a decision we can share so we can build this thing once and move on. And I'll adopt the thing that you have oftentimes. And so that willingness to bend, or willingness to really cede authority on design decisions, makes me often a better systems designer.
That's how you approach that conversation. Isn't I made this, you should use it here. It's kind of I'm just here to listen and connect.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'm here to make a decision that we share.
Yeah, right. It's not too, things need to get done during those conversations. Yes. Anyway, thank you very much, Nathan.
Thank you.
Yeah.